So let's validate our React form. First of all, let's run our project in the dev server. Our project is running in the dev server. Now let's create our form by using form tag and use a input tag. Type will be text and placeholder. Let's give it a username and then name is equal to username. Now let's copy this line and paste it 3 times. Let's change the value there. Type would be number and the placeholder, let's give it a phone and the name, give it a phone. There we will be using email and same placeholder is email, and in the name email. Now I'll give a break tag here. Let's copy it and paste it there. Now let's give it a button which type would be submit. Let's write submit. Now let's go and see in our browser. We have our form. Now let's create our initial states by using use state hook. Let's name our form data and set form data equal to use state. Let's keep it a blank object, and then let's create a error as well. Error state, set errors. Also keep it a blank object. Now let's create our first function, that is on change handler. On change. Now in the input tag, let's add an attribute on change and add the on change function that we just created. Let's copy it and paste it in all of the inputs. So the onChange function will create a key value pairs like name and value, and the value is stored in the name dynamically in our form data. And this onChange function handler will take event as a parameter. Now let's set the key value pairs in our form data object. I'll give a spread operator form data, and event.target.name is to event.target.value, event.target.value, and there is to not equal to. Now let's console our form data to see the effect. Let's open our browser, go to the console, and write something in our username field. We can see the username and the value are changing dynamically. Now let's remove our console.log. So the spread operator helps to maintain the unchanged field when the other input fields are updating. So let's make our code more readable. Let's use object destructuring, constant name and the value equal to event.target, and we don't have to use event.target every time we are using name and the value. We can simply write name and value. So let's create our validation function. It receives a parameter, our form data, but let's write form for now, it doesn't matter. Now let's create an empty object. Let's give a name error. Now let's write our validation logic. If the username is not available in the form object, let's create a new attribute. Let's give it a name username. Username is required. It is stored in our error object. Let's do for our other field as well. If the phone is not available in the form object, let's create a new attribute in the error object. Let's write phone is required. Let's do for our email as well. If the email is not present, let's create a new attribute email. Required. So if the email is present, we still have to check for the validation, the validity of the email. Let's open the browser. Now open the ChatGPT and write in the prompt email validation regex for JS. So we're now copying the regex and paste it inside our validation function. Now we are testing our email with this regex. If the email we provide is invalid, then in the email attribute give a new error, invalid email. Now let's return our error, the error object we created in our validation function. So before writing our onSubmit function, let's fix our code. I have mistakenly write username instead of phone here. Alright. Now let's create our onSubmit function. Let's write a console log to check if it's working or not. In the form tag, let's write the attribute onSubmit and mention our function we just created. Let's reload the page and submit. We got a problem here. Our page is being reloaded every time we are submitting. Let's fix this. Write the code event.prevent default. This will prevent the loading of the page every time we are submitting the form. Now the problem is gone and we can see the clicked in the console. Now let's use our validation function we created before. We are going to call the function inside our onSubmit function. So whenever we click the submit button, the validation function will be called. We know that validation function will return an error object. We are going to set those objects in our errors state. Now let's create a flag. Let's give it name is submit. And set it submit. Initially let's give it a false. Now let's set the is submit value from false to true after we click the button. Now let's write a use effect. In the dependency array, let's write is submit. So whenever the is submit is changed, our use effect will be used. Now it's submit. If it is true, then write a logic. If the error object is empty, is equal to 0. Let's console log our form data. Else we are going to console log our errors. Now let's change the is submit value from true to false. Now let's go to our browser, reload the page, click the submit button. We can see the errors. Let's write something in the username and submit it. We can see the errors is gone of username, and in the phone error is gone. Write something in the email. We can see a message, but it is not given by us. It is by the default validation check of our browser. To avoid that, let's write an attribute in the form no validate. Now let's submit. We can see the error has changed from email is required to invalid email. Let's write a valid email. We can see our form data and the errors are gone. Now let's show our error in our UI. Let's go to below the input tag and write errors.username. Let's copy it. Let's put below other input fields. Here let's write for our phone, and below the email input let's write our errors of email. Now let's check the browser. Let's submit the button. We can see the errors in our UI. Let's try to fix it. Write something in the user field. The error is gone. It is gone as well, and we can see form data in our console. So this is how we do form validation in React.